Greetings and welcome back to Fun with Dashcams. This is going to be a review of a slightly older model, but actually what I found was a very nice camera, assuming you're willing to live with the size of the thing, but probably very helpful and probably recommended for truckers or people who go on long drives on the highway as part of their normal day-to-day job. So without further ado, this is going to be probably video 4 Delta. It's a review of the Papago P2Pro, a camera which was probably reviewed a few times, but not so much because it's not very common, mainly because of its size, but for its features, probably very handy and beneficial. I know it's very popular in certain European countries and probably should be popular here in the US as well for, like I said, truckers, long-haul truckers, or people who find themselves on the open highway. Maybe not so ideal for inner-city driving and driving that involves lots of lane changes and turns, and I'll cover that in more detail. Okay, and in this case, this is falling under Series 4 as a single lens forward-facing camera and a retail example, kind of similar to the Garmin Dashcam 20, and actually has more features, but not near as small. It is GPS enabled, however, for significantly less money now than even the Garmin Dashcam 20, almost $100 difference in price as of the time that I purchased it. Whereas the Garmin has come down from $250 from when I purchased it about a year ago to about $230 that I've seen in a lot of retail circles. This I purchased in a retail establishment called Fry's Electronics, not on clearance, but just as a regular price, for about $140 something, again, not on sale. So moving on, we are going to be reviewing the Papago P2Pro, as opposed to the older P2, P1, and there actually is a newer version, which is the P3 Pro, which actually has a built-in feature using maps. So it actually will display. It doesn't replace an actual GPS where you can put in a destination and it'll do any kind of computations. It's merely a feature to display a map to show kind of where you are, not a medium res, not exactly a high res map. And it also will compute a street that you're on, so it'll actually display that. It'll stamp that if GPS is enabled in the video itself. So it'll watermark time, date, GPS, and a location, an actual street, not an address per se, but a street you're driving on, or maybe an intersection or a stretch of highway. So that may appeal to some people, but for the extra price, I myself wouldn't see it unless it was something that you really felt you needed. So onward, we're going to cover some very interesting features, the overall, plus some unique features to this, which not every dashcam in this price range has. So this is a pretty feature-rich product for the price as of now, April of 2015. We'll cover what I found the good, what I found maybe the bad, and the not so ugly. So onward to the tabletop, we first look at the box. Again, this is an actual retail, and as you can see, it's marked for retail, not trying to display. As you notice, it's giving a lot of features, but it's not trying to inundate you with a few particular features just to try to stand out, because this is assuming the fact that it is true HD or full HD, which is 1820p. It does have built-in GPS. I mean, it comes with all the product line. All of this product line, the P1, P2, came with GPS. They do offer other cameras that are not near as big. One that does have GPS, but many that don't. Of course, a G sensor standard. It has a particular feature I thought was interesting, lane departure, which is really good for straightaway highways, not so good for lots of lane changes. Front collision warning system, and this feature and motion detection is part of the same system. It's just depending on how you're looking at it. It does have a motion detection, so a parking mode basically, but motion detection, you know, if you're going to use it for that, it may or may not be beneficial. It of course has auto record on power and all the typical features you'd assume. You know, working together with basically motion detection, lane departure, looking at a particular frame, whether the change is happening overall as in motion detection or in a certain calibrated set that you must calibrate on one of the setup screens. This you might find beneficial, like I said, for highway driving. This is good for stop and go. It also supports a stop and go feature to let you know when it's time to accelerate, as well as this to tell you when you're getting too close to a vehicle based on the change in perspective that you need to slow down or back away. Lane departure, if you're drifting one way or the other, assuming that you're driving in a pretty straight line for a long period of time. I found this interesting. It actually does have a speed camera warning. Not really beneficial in the U.S. as speed cameras are not widely known, and it's a community-based project to actually record them. So it may or not be useful to you, but probably more useful if you're in certain European or Asian countries. It also has a 130-degree lens, about 130 degrees, so it gives you a nice wide field of view. They say auto bump, that's your G sensor. It does have a 2.4-inch screen, so like you saw as a feature for some of the cheaper taxi cam configurations who have 2.4-inch screens, this one actually does have a 2.4-inch screen that comes in handy because this is true high def, and it's a relatively, it supports WVGA, so widescreen VGA. Of course, cyclic recording. They say digital wide dynamic range. That's basically WDR. So it actually does do a pretty good job in low light conditions, very comparable to normal WDR. And as it says, heads up display. So it's one of the features. It actually has 3 modes. It will either, well, 4. You can either blank out the screen, you can show a clock, you can actually show heading with speed, and or you can show basically nothing. So also has HDMI output, so it's nice. It does support data and data USB, so USB power or data to be able to remotely download per the cheat that I like to talk about. And it supports a camera feature, but probably not going to be used that much, although on the heads-up screen it actually does support what I think is funny is it doesn't call it panic or SOS, it calls it backup. So it does support G-sensor, and it also supports a button that says backup on the far left. So it has multi-feature buttons, just depending, but it only has four main buttons plus power that you can use on the screen. So go ahead and doing the unboxing. As you can see, the different sides. Really intended more for retail. It's not some Taiwan special or Chinese special. Comes with a very nice multi-language user's guide. Pretty slimmed down. Actually comes with a warranty card, product registration warranty. Here's the receipt I got. So $150 retail about. Has a singular universal mount option, which basically says you can mount on dash via a GPS or a ring, a disc, or on a movable GPS mount, similar to the roll your own poor man's dash cam setups that I've shown. You can get those for about $20. It's basically a non-permanent solution, so you can use that, put a disc on the dash, but plenty large, but also on a windscreen, kind of visible. Comes with a 10-meter USB mini power cord, but also supports standard USB data, and the Papago itself. So as you can see, this is not a small GPS, and when you add the mount, it becomes rather obtrusive. So this is not a stealth model by any stretch of the imagination. Of course, comes with a 2.4-inch screen. So anything with a screen this size, as compared to certain other ones we've looked at, like the 0801, which does support GPS, but has a very tiny screen. It's mainly for just aiming, not really for reviewing. This actually has a 2.4-inch screen, so it's a lot more advantageous if you plan to review videos. So remember, that's what you give up with a larger display. you also give up the ability to hide it somewhere. Of course, things without screens, very easy to put behind the rearview mirror, very easy to make it less obtrusive. This is going to be something that's maybe intended for a larger vehicle, not really intended for a small vehicle, but you know, to each his own. Of course, 4 main buttons. We have an actual power switch, which also functions as a lock. This is on the left side, a full SD card. Now it'll accept micro SDs, but with an adapter. But it's primarily designed for full SDs, full-size SDs. So it's really nice for people that have really Class 10 cards. Of course, is recommended. I attempted to use a Class 6. It really didn't like it. So really Class 10 is recommended or required. You of course have the on. Now one thing to note is this is a capacitor. So one thing that's really nice about this is it has very high heat tolerance. It was anywhere from -20 to I think about +80 was storage, and +60 Celsius, so very hot. You would bake before this thing is really going to give out. But what's also nice is this particular camera actually has several temperature sensors in it that are intended to keep track, and if the ambient temperature or if the operating temperature of the unit itself inside the case is too hot, it'll automatically shut itself down. It'll give you a warning, it'll display a warning, and then it'll shut off. And that's another thing about this is every feature that it has actually has an on-screen warning, a very simplified icon to show you that it's beeping, so it gives you an audible plus a visual indicator if you have that turned on. Of course, the horseshoe has a very limited, it's not a newbie joint by any stretch, but it does give you a little bit of degrees of freedom. Not much though. It's really intended to be mounted either like this or like that. So pretty much it's meant to be pointed straight. It's not meant to be really pointed any other direction. And horizontal, what I found interesting is this doesn't lay perfectly flat like you'd think maybe this was flat. It actually tends to want to be more like this, because if you notice the lens is pointing straight out, so it's going to actually point down and up, because I think the viewing angle is intended to be ideal for maybe a trucker or someone where this is mounted high above. It's not intended to be viewed or displayed down below, perfectly horizontal. If you mount it on a dash, you know, it's going to be pointed like that, so you're not really going to be able to see it. So it's intended to be mounted higher up on the windscreen. Looking at the other side, we of course have HDMI out. We have USB data or power with USB. The speakers on the bottom with the microphone, which is actually advantageous, whereas a lot of dash cams may have the speaker mounted on the front where sound will reflect off the windscreen. This actually gets a very nice sound recording quality because the microphone is angled away and more towards the bottom, so able to capture, especially mounted up, any audio that's within the cab without necessarily picking up road noise from the windscreen. So that kind of gives you, and of course like I said, 4 main buttons. Here's the power, up, down, OK, and record. This is up, down. Record also has multi-functions for OK, and you know, it's very simplified in the construction. Doesn't have the normal 6 buttons, just has the 4 plus power that also functions as a lock for the SD, which is kind of nice. So it prevents you from inadvertently pulling out the SD card while using the camera. So the particulars, these are just the highlights. It is an Ambarella. That's a typo. It should be an A2S70 with an Aptina 1/3 inch CMOS. It's a 3.5 megapixel. It records really in one and only resolution, 1080p, and it stores in a TS file. So this is actually a slightly older design. It wasn't where H.264 with standard AVI or MOV files. It of course went a different direction and is recording in TS, which a lot of cameras that were true HD in 2013, that's why I said this is about a 2-year design. So it's come down in price. Originally retailed for over $200, $200 something dollars, and has now come down to about $150. By default, the main high mark here is it supports GPS, which actually is a very good GPS. It's On the more responsive than a lot of others. Of course, not as responsive as, say, a $350 GPS camera, but still gives you pretty good resolution, and also has a very sensitive G sensor. Of course, I don't really use that. I turn it off. It has a very good motion and parking. It seemed to do a very nice job with low light, so the enhanced WDR, the digital WDR as it said. It's also got a feature for forward collision warning system, so when it senses in that calibrated view that something is kind of moving towards, whereas motion detection looks across the whole field of view, you calibrate it towards the center of the screen, and it looks for a change in that perspective in that particular calibrated view right in the middle, and then determines if something is getting too close, and that's forward collision. If it sees that you're actually stopped or slowing down and that particular item in the field of view is moving away, it'll actually give you an indicator, particularly when you're stopped. That's the stop and go feature where it'll say move forward. If it detects, it also senses the stripe marks of highway lanes, so the lane drift, it's the lane diversion warning system, will actually kick in and tell you if you're starting to go over a line. But I found out that with driving, I'll cover that in the not so good. That it's probably a feature advantageous for truckers, not really advantageous for daily drivers who make a lot of turns and a lot of winding roads. Time is automatically synced with GPS. You can turn that off if you want. However, I found that it's fairly accurate because it does sync. It actually takes the time signal with GPS and actually does sync itself. So you got to be make sure that you set your your mean Greenwich time plus or minus appropriately, and it will actually compute based on the GPS signal itself. There is no need to manually set it and then set with GPS time. Of course, built-in 2.4-inch screen, and as of the time of this review, $150 retail. Looking at the website, here is US Papago, of course, Papago Inc. They do actually have a office within the U.S., so warranty support and everything is not done via putting it in a carton and shipping it off for 3 or 4 weeks. They immediately steer you towards retail, but if retail isn't covered after that gives out for the return policy, the company does have a U.S. office, and that's one thing they're geared towards is full retail support or after-sales support. Kind of going over their specifications. They do have a 6-piece glass with IR filter, so it gets rid of a lot of the oversaturation from IR that some of the cheaper cameras suffer from. It does, again, 1080p, and that really is the one and only setting. They do say Class 6. I tried it with a Class 6 with a cheaper one, and it didn't seem to like that. One thing I did find interesting is that it requires a minimum 8 gigs. So really, go ahead and go all out and spend your money and get a 32 gig Class 10. That's just going to be the best bang for your buck. Does support HDMI. And here's the operating temperature from 14 degrees. Excuse me, I misquoted. Storage temperature, yeah, here is what I said, -4, so roughly centigrade, but -4 to 176. Which is rather hot, but average operating from 14 to 150, about 149 degrees Fahrenheit before it shuts down. So, and it will shut itself down. So it's not like it's just going to fry itself. So those are highlights. So going on to the good, because it's true 1080p and really no other setting, I did look, and there is no hack. This is pretty much what it is. It supports 1080p, so you're recording at true high def, whether you want to or not. So that's really good for you, especially simplifying the setup. Multiple mounting options, either on the windscreen or on a permanent or semi-permanent mount on the dash, because you have the option of mounting above or below. It's very, very good daytime. As good or possibly better than my experience with the 0801, and I think definitely better than the Garmin DC20. The GPS is on par with responsiveness and accuracy. And one thing to note is has very good nighttime relative to the Garmin, which was again $250 at purchase, whereas this was $150. It's as good or better. GPS logging in this camera is done via .nmea as opposed to GPX files for the Garmin. But again, very standard. This is a standard. It goes actually by NMEA, which is a maritime standard for GPS plus other things in the maritime industry. So it's a very well established standard. And of course, auto time sync. It has automatic overlay for GPS coordinates, for speed, and date timestamp, and it's all at the bottom edge of the recording. So unlike the 0801 where it did it at the top left of the screen, or other variants which may do it elsewhere in a block, this takes the full downside. So it actually did GPS heading, speed, and date timestamp. It also has simplified menus for quick and go setup, but also for the advanced features that you can turn on and off. As I alluded to, it has advanced menus for those who really want to dig in and turn that stuff on and take full advantage. It is relatively easy to use in its base screen, and the visual cues with audio cue may actually appeal to people, and I'll cover that here in a second. The built-in screen is adequate for actually reviewing video, and it has very good audio pickup. So it actually does a little bit of noise cancellation, and I noticed that audio came loud and clear. Of course, with the windows rolled down and a lot of wind noise, you can forget it. But it did pick up road noise quite a bit, but all these will, given the placement and what its job is. But it seemed to do a very good job of filtering out voice conversations and the radio. One of the and again visual cueing features for each of the advanced settings. Lane detection, stop and go, I thought was kind of interesting that it actually senses via the G sensor or GPS when you're at a standstill or at a relative slowdown, a very slow speed. It senses when people move on, so it gives you a cue as to when it's time to maybe accelerate because traffic is moving. I thought that was kind of interesting. It also has a timer, so it actually functions as a traditional tachograph in that you can set a time for the driver. You can also set a maximum speed. Of course, it's not relative to any kind of GPS coordinates to say, hey, for this stretch road, it's just a maximum speed. So if you're a trucker with a company that says you're not supposed to go any faster than whatever, it gives you a nice little warning, so you can set it a maximum for miles per hour or any kind of other indicator depending upon what your desire is to alert when you're going past that mark, and of course past that allotted time frame. So if you're scheduled to drive 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours, it will give you a cue to say, hey, you've reached that time and it's done. The fact that it's because of the like I said, the high, which I don't put in here, is the temperature protection. Because it is a capacitor base, not battery, it can operate at a much hotter temperature for much longer and be stored at a much higher temperature, and that because it uses a very high capacity capacitor. Of course, the downside is there is no real parking mode. So motion detection, as long as power is supplied, it will work, but no parking mode per se where the camera will power itself, because once power is cut off, it turns off pretty quickly. So part of the bad, I forgot to mention this, but first things first is that it takes quite a while to power up. I counted on average, about 18 to 20 seconds for the unit to actually power up and then start recording. So it's not exactly a speedy unit, whereas in a lot of systems you've seen me show, it powers up in 5 to 10 seconds. This thing powers up for about 20 seconds before it actually starts to record. It is also somewhat bulky and obtrusive, so this is by no means a stealth model. I also found that the lane departure was an interesting feature, but it's really intended for straightaway driving. If you do a lot of lane changes, turns, the thing gets really annoying because it sounds off quite often. So for your city drivers, probably best to just turn that off. Also, forward collision warning. I have found tended to be a little too sensitive. You can set the sensitive for high, medium, low, but I found that even with normal city driving, especially a lot of stop and go, that you find yourself driving a little more than about 10 miles an hour, it has a tendency to sound off. And also, especially where I live, it's fairly flat except for a lot of overpasses where the highway or major roads go over an intersection. It had a tendency to sound those as being like it was a collision or a collision warning. So, especially with no cars in front of me, it sensed that change in the field of view of an oncoming overpass as being a vehicle. So that got a little annoying. So it's intended for relatively flat, relatively smooth grades. Not necessarily good for mountainous or hilly or any kind of area that has a sudden change in elevation of the road or a sudden change in the grade, the angle. It even sensed a lot of turns because we have a lot of steeper turns in a lot of our freeways because we live in a spaghetti bowl, so a lot of elevated highway stretches. It would sound that off. It would sound off the forward collision warning as I took banking turns driving around where I live. So like I said, this is where I say the bad is the advanced features are probably best for truckers, not really good for daily driving. So most likely average users are going to turn that off. The not so ugly is it's comparable in quality and price to a lot of offerings that are smaller. However, a lot of these offerings are more expensive. So if you're not too worried about obtrusive, in fact, you may want people to see the camera. It's not easily hidden, if really can be hidden at all. But functioning as a dash cam as it's intended, it functions superbly in my estimation. Especially considering I bought a unit which has comparable quality, but actually slightly less at nighttime and far fewer features for considerably more. Only a few months, really only about the same time that this thing was released, and yet that camera on the U.S. market is still selling for a price similar to what it was when released, maybe $20 less. Whereas this thing is far cheaper, has similar quality, similar GPS accuracy, but is much more feature rich. I think that it's probably a better consideration than the Garmin. Fully supported by warranty. A big plus for U.S. consumers, and for you truckers that want all the features, you might want to consider this. Viewing software is available. You will find that the TS files, because of the viewing software, is not fully supported by all media players, but it is supported by all video editors. So that is something to consider. But the viewing software, of course, will give you Google Maps with GPS. But one thing I found that you have to, and one thing that I thought was interesting was that just like in a lot of the all-winners and some of the mid-ranged Novatechs, it stores everything in both your GPS logs, or I should say for the all-winners, the GPS log plus the video, it stores in a single folder. So this thing stamps the videos in a series. So it's basically P0001, P0002, and it stamps the GPS logs as P000 whatever .NMEA. So they're easy to distinguish, and it prints them in series. One thing also to note is you cannot change the time. That was something I probably should have put down here under the bad, is you cannot specify 1 minute, 3 minute, 5 minute. No, it's 5 minutes. This thing records at 5 minutes and that's it. Unless it's powering down, in which case it chops the TS video off at that point. So a benefit of that is, whereas you might corrupt certain H.264, this version of the file actually cuts it off. A TS file is actually the base of many DVDs, so the size is not based upon a frame marker, it's just based upon the number of frames, period. It does have iframes and F frames, B frames, but it's a lot less sensitive to that time stamp that you will find in the metadata that can corrupt a lot of other different file containers. So I think that's why they went with the TS. And as far as software, they do offer a link to the Go Live player on the Papago website. Just to note, TS is not supported natively. The NMEA was added a year or two ago, so the NMEA GPS log is fully supported by Registered Reviewer, but if you wish to view the files in Registered Reviewer as well, you're going to have to convert them into an MOV or an AVI using alternative means, but it's not going to natively play in that player. But like I said, you do have the Go Live player offered by the company, and it's actually pretty good. It's purely for viewing. You cannot export anything. You cannot edit. It doesn't synchronize video to create an alternate video stream. It's purely a video editor with a renderer of the map using the GPS log, and provides a basic viewing of GPS data and G-sensor data. Oh yeah, and that's also to note is within the NMEA, your G-sensor data is set in a standard format. So unlike a lot of these other players which may embed the G-sensor data, you can actually pull the G-sensor data out because it's a standard, well-published and well-supported for the National Maritime standards for different sensor data. So that's what's kind of neat, and that's why I think they chose that particular setup. So they actually separate G-sensor from the video to give you the access to the G-sensor data for better reconstructing if necessary. And I will append another video to give you samples of daytime and nighttime driving. I'll actually feature this in another experimental video in the Series 8, which will be GPS enabled cameras and how they match up with a live stream of an objective camera, so the control with the speedometer. Very similar to an experiment I did under the Dashcam Army files as experiments, and I'm actually going to integrate that to show you how responsive the different GPS setups are. So this is going to be featured in that as well. I hope you enjoy this review, and I hope you have a pleasant evening.